We are back with attorney Ed Massey, former state representative. What's the problem with the Kentucky GOP? Why can't we get it together? Why don't we have a good structure in place?
I think that the GOP has lost its focus and its vision. I've been a Republican, like I said, my entire adult life. And being a Republican didn't mean that you discounted everybody else. What I see now, not only on the local level, but on the national level, is this great divide, this great division, where it's more about attacking your opponent than engaging in civil discourse with your opponent. And I think we've lost our way. I really believe that. And I think it starts with the local parties, and then that culminates at the state level. I don't think that they've kind of got reckless in their approach. And the reason I say that is because Republicans have now taken over the state. When I moved to Boone County back in 1995, it was difficult to find a Republican in Boone County. I was a Republican, but the local officials were Democrats. In fact, going back in my memory, a lot of the local officials now in leadership at that time were Democrats. Gary Moore was a Democrat. Michael Helmig was a Democrat. I think the Commonwealth Attorney and County Attorney were Democrats. In fact, Senator John Schickel was a Democrat. And I think he was the first to change in the local politics to become a Republican. And I think they changed because they felt like that their party, the Democratic Party at that time, had basically gone on a different direction that they couldn't support or be a part of. And so they became Republicans. And I was a Republican at that time as well. The community continued to grow and develop. As it developed, it became, I think, a very solid community. We did some great things. We had some wonderful leaders in the Republican Party, but we had some great leaders in the Democratic Party as well. And I don't discount that because, we are a people that should work together. At that time, as things developed, we got some very radical or extreme people into the party that in many ways were libertarians that could not win an election as libertarians. So they ran as Republicans under the cover of the Republican Party in order to win elections. And they had some success in that. And it became very, very divisive, if you will. I was called a rhino more times than I can imagine, Republican in name only. Well, that's not true at all, because I was a Republican when some of these folks were Democrats. Right. And so the fact of the matter is, if you look at what a rhino really is, Republican in name only, would that not also be a libertarian that's running under the banner of a Republican?
Right.
So it's just become nasty. The politics, I don't know how to say it, but in the local party here locally, we had somebody that came in and was able to secure leadership of the local Republican Party, Chet Hand, who came from Alaska. And when he came in and took that over, he began to recruit people to run against the existing Republican officials.
Right.
So even while he was a Republican leading the local party, he ran against an incumbent Republican commissioner.
Right.
He sought people to run against the other members, like even myself, that were Republicans in the party. And so it became divisive. And so if I'm going to go to a party and they're just going to attack me, then I'm not going to go to those meetings or be part of that. At the same time, Boone County politics became apathetic. They were either fat and happy or they just were tired of politics. And so when the last elections, we've had, 8, 10, 12% turnout in primaries.
Horrible turnout. Horrible.
And because of that, some of these extreme groups were able to get a foothold that became a stronghold in the local community. And until Boone County or local communities in northern Kentucky get better turnout, they're going to continue to see more of the same. That's just the way it's going to be. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. To give you an example, one of the attacks that went on for me was, I think it was in 2008. I wasn't in public office. I was a school board member, I believe. I was a lawyer, had a firm, and my law partner was a Democrat. I was a Republican. And we were able to serve our clients very well because we had different ideas, different idealism.
Right.
And I went to an event that was a meet and greet for a then candidate, Hillary Clinton. And I didn't do anything other than pay the price of admission. I think it was $250. to meet a person that was running for president of the United States.
Former First Lady of the United States.
That's correct.
Senator.
And that was it. That was the extent of it. Never voted for her, never supported her. Yet when it came to my election, that was used over and over and over,
Right.
like I had sold out to the Democratic Party, which was obviously not true. If you look at my voting record, look at my history, or just who I am. And on the day of the election last year, next to every political sign I had that just says Representative 66th District, they put a yard sign that said he supported or gave money to Hillary Clinton. And it was just, it was nasty politics.
Well, it's disingenuous. It's
a lie.
Continuation of lies, which go unchecked these days.
And the problem is there's no accountability for that.
Right.
There was also an ad put out that I had an Ashley Madison website, which nobody believed, because if anybody knows me at all, they know that I'm a committed family man, that I've been married in June. Proudly, it will be 37 years. I've been married to my wonderful wife, Anita. I've got 3 daughters that are in the community. 2 of them are school teachers in Kenton County. Nobody bought into that, but it was very hateful, very hurtful, and there was no accountability for that. Now,
Right.
I could have sued the individual that I believe was responsible for that, but what do I get from that other than more headache and more
Right.
use of my time? I just think that we feel politically lost right now in Northern Kentucky.
Well, you brought up Chet Hand, and this is a guy. He's a current Boone County commissioner. He was part of a group that showed up with religious flags and stood outside of a LGBTQ event on a church property in Boone County and intimidated these folks that were just there having a good celebration. They weren't harming anybody. This is a guy who wants to lead all citizens of Boone County, and he's out here intimidating these folks. And now he's running for Judge Executive against Gary Moore, who's been in office since 1998. It's very apparent that Commissioner Hand is trying to push Judge Executive Moore out of the party. What are your thoughts on this race? Can he beat Judge Moore? Now, I've voted against Judge Moore. I've actually campaigned for him as well. I think he's a good guy. But does Chet have the support of this far-right kind of radical group that will push him over Judge Moore?
The answer to that depends on turnout. And the reason I tell you that is because, again, Gary and I have had our ups and downs, positives and negatives. In 2004, when I ran for office, he told me that he wouldn't get involved in the race. And ultimately he did, and he supported my opponent. My opponent prevailed. And yet, I get that. That's politics. And so, but Gary and I had a conversation after. We worked through it. In the last election, he was very supportive of me. And so you understand that as you go through this process, you gain knowledge, you learn more, you become a more effective leader, a more effective legislator, more effective community member. The concern I have with Chet Hand is that these people that shout the Constitution at every meeting they have, at the same time, they are the first to object if you say something in opposition to them, which gets in the way of free speech. And it's amazing to me that the people that scream and loudest for the Constitution are also in many ways the first to violate it. In Chet Hand's case, I was a leader in the community, have been my entire time I've been in Boone County. Chet Hand has never had a conversation with me.
Right.
Even when he became the president of the local Republican Party, I was censored in the local party, very much like Senator McConnell. Yeah. And when I asked why I was censored, it was basically because they said I said negative things about the party. And I didn't say negative things about the party. I said truthful things
Correct.
about the party. Like in the last election, you supported my opponent against me in the election. And yet that was censured. And I kind of wore that as a badge of honor, to be honest, because Senator McConnell and I always had our differences too, but we also have our likenesses. And I've become very fond of what the senator has had to do to navigate trying to control a party that in many ways has just become overrun with this radicalism. In fact, I think that's why John Boehner probably stepped away from his position as Speaker of the House. So I think that Chet Hand will have his organization. He has this strong little group that will absolutely come out and vote anti-Gary Moore. But I think if people will get out and vote and take it into heart that what has Gary done for our community versus what has Chet Hand done for our community.
Right.
Gary has been here through the development over the years. I was a school board member. I think we went from something like 8,500 students to over 20,000 students.
Right.
We've built, we've grown, we've kept a lower tax base. All of that was implemented by leadership working together. Chet Hand's moved here, and all he's done has been disruptive.
Right.
And so if people will get out and vote, I think Gary will prevail. Returning to your comments earlier, I will also say that, about the him carrying the signs and all of that kind of thing. Here's the thing I believe. I don't agree with everything in our community. I don't agree with every lifestyle in our community. But I'm also a Christian first. And I believe that God called us to love our neighbors as ourselves. I don't have to agree with you to care about you, to provide compassion and empathy towards you, to provide resources for you. Not special treatment, but equitable treatment. And that's what community is about. We don't always agree. We will never always agree. And that's what makes America so great, is that we can disagree. The problem is we used to be able to disagree agreeably, or to disagree in a way that we could have constructive conversations. And then when something was decided, then we could move forward in a concerted cause. Now, it's, pick up your rocks, go home, or throw your rocks. It's not about having any good conversations. That's why I quit going to the Republican Party meetings, because they became very negative. The lady that sought for me to be censured, I think, was involved with with one of the radical extreme groups that was in D.C. When all of this happened. And so, I don't, frankly, my life is worth more to me than that chaos. I am willing and have been a public servant my entire life to help other people. I believe that's our call, is to help and love our brothers as ourselves, love our sisters as ourselves. But I'm not going to waste my time or be in nonsensical discussions. There's just too many important things to do to allow that to be the core conversation that's controlling the day.
Well, let's take it a step further. Recently I registered as an independent after being a Republican since the age of 18. I've ran 3 different races as a Republican, but it's that far-right group that has hijacked the party that made me say, you know what, I don't align with this anymore. But as an attorney, you many times have sworn an oath to defend the Constitution, no matter what. As Republicans, as conservatives, yes, our faith is what we lean on. But Democrats do that as well. We're in a screaming match of whose faith and whose beliefs are more important, and the Constitution requires them to be equal. So this far-right group of your party and my former party, what they're really saying is that's not true. Even though so they're really against their own Constitution.
Well, what's really bothered me over the years, even when I served in the State House, was that, I think people can have different opinions. I had a pastor once upon a time that was a Democrat. I have no doubt that he loved Jesus and that he was one of the best pastors I've ever been under. He was absolutely pro-life, but he was also, from a pro-choice standpoint, he said, my job is not to condemn those that do something that disagree with my values and my beliefs. Very much like Jesus.
Because abortion is strictly a religious issue.
And the fact is, I don't think nowhere in the Bible that I read is Jesus classified as a Republican or a Democrat. Right. And so I think, and actually there's a famous sociologist that wrote a book called, and I think his name was Tony Campolo, that wrote a book called Is Jesus a Republican or a Democrat? The point being is, Jesus called people to love one another. Even the disciples that followed Jesus had disagreements. But the fact of the matter is, they could still carry on a conversation without hatred. One of the things that bothered me about the pro-life movement is that not all, but some of the pro-life movement basically exhibited a bitter hatred to anybody that disagreed with them. Now, you're not going to win somebody over by hating them. You're going to win somebody over by loving them. And I believe, I'm absolutely pro-life. I believe that God has a purpose for everything. My dad, who I mentioned earlier, recently passed in March. He had a saying that God has it all under control. God has it all. I think the exact quote was, God has it all figured out. And I believe that to be true. But I don't think anywhere in the Bible is it called for us to hate other people. It's called for us to hate sin. It's called for us to hate evil and wrongdoing, but not other people. And I think we've gotten in this divisive society where people just don't care about others, and it's about me, and it's not about we. And I think that's a problem. And so I can find good. I can honestly find good in everybody, and that whether they're Republican or Democrat.
One of my biggest problems with the pro-life movement, one, obviously it was hijacked as a political cause. It's a great fundraiser. It's great to help you get elected, and I refuse to kind of bow down to that pressure. But two, if we're really going to say we're pro-life, that means we also have to look out for those who are already living. And it seems that they kind of get pushed to the back burner. We have a large percentage of children in this country without health care. We've made advances, but it's not perfect. We have veterans who don't have health care. We have veterans killing themselves every day in large numbers. It's gotten better, but it's not great. Senior citizens who can't afford to pay their health insurance premiums. People die because in the wealthiest nation on the planet, they can't afford their own health care.
Well, I think you're exactly on point with that. In fact, again, if we would spend all of the energy that is involved in this debate into reaching out, doing education, and helping people understand, then I think there would be a different outcome altogether. I think we can provide better healthcare services. I think we can provide better information to young mothers. I can't imagine, to be candid with you, a young lady that finds herself pregnant and having to make this difficult decision. As a male, how can I even put myself in the shoes of that woman trying to make those decisions? My job is to love her. I want her to have that child. I do. I'm pro-life. But I also don't want her to be demonized if she makes a choice that, in my opinion, may be the wrong choice, but she's still a citizen of our community. She's still under our Constitution. She still has rights under our Constitution. The whole pro-life thing really is bothersome in this respect also. I had a perfect voting record for pro-life as it relates to the legislative term that I served. And yet they did not endorse me. They endorsed my opponent. And that was all about politics. It had nothing to do about the core cause of belief.
Well, and let's focus on that for a minute. I don't want to rehash that whole campaign, but let's just be clear. T.J. Roberts, many people view him, and whether it's my opinion or not doesn't matter, but many people view him as somebody who has been groomed by the radical right. Your Savannah Maddoxes, your Thomas Masseys, your Rand Pauls. This kid, and I can call him that, I'm over a decade older than him, received endorsements from people all over the country in elected office. No other person's going to receive those endorsements without that help, without that assistance from the Thomas Masseys and Rand Pauls. This was clearly a targeted attack against you to get someone into office that they knew would vote in lockstep with them.
It's all about control. They couldn't control me, and they knew it.
Right.
And they can control Mr. Roberts. He's young, and I don't wish him any ill will. I wish him the very best. I certainly hope that he does what's best for our community. I hope he reaches out in prayer to Christ. I really mean that. I sincerely mean that.
I hope that he would do well. Maybe once you're elected, you have some sort of epiphany and you think, oh, God, I actually won.
But I do believe there has to be truthfulness. And so, for instance, when he was in the campaign calling himself a, quote, constitutional lawyer, well, he'd only been a lawyer less than a year.
Right.
You don't become a constitutional lawyer your first year out of law school. I've been practicing 32 years. I defend the Constitution every day of my life.
Right.
But I didn't hold myself out as a constitutional lawyer. I hold myself out as a lawyer. He said that, I think, because he sued the governor and was able to get a verdict that basically the governor had erred in some of the decisions that he had made. And I get that.
And he didn't do that alone.
He didn't do that alone. He was the plaintiff. He wasn't the lawyer that brought this.
Correct.
That doesn't make him a constitutional lawyer. This week he posed with a assault weapon with his girlfriend, and basically, said that they were celebrating July 4th a little early. Again, I'm all for the Second Amendment, but I don't have to be braggadocious about toting an assault weapon around to say I'm in support of the Second Amendment.
Right.
I think that's the division of our party that you're seeing alive and well. When I talked to I was supported by the entire Republican leadership in the last race because I was Judiciary Chair and we had been very effective in the work we had done together. And yet, you're right. I had a target on my back. Every time Tom Massey would, and here's what's really disconcerting for me, and we need to get back to schools and civics, is that when Tom Massey would make a questionable decision, they would call the office in Frankfurt and ask me to resign. So when he sent out his Christmas card with he and his family, all holding assault weapons, I had people calling Frankfurt asking me to resign my seat. So the ignorance, if you will, of some folks, and I'm not judging them for that. They just don't know. Just like a lot of Republicans, candidly, don't know the difference between a primary and a general election.
Correct.
And in Boone County, the elections are the primary.
You live and die in a primary.
That's correct. I mean, they know. They went after me in the primary because they know they couldn't beat me in a general election.
Correct.
And the reason they couldn't beat me in a general election is I had support of Republicans and Democrats.
Right.
Because I care about people and I worked with people across the aisle. And I think that's the only way we as a nation are going to be successful. There's a lot of talk about working across the aisle, but you can't do that when the person turns around, you're stabbing them in the back. One of the proudest moments in the legislature that I had on a personal level was Susan Westrom, who had been a Democrat representative for many years from the Lexington area. When you leave office, they always give you the opportunity to have somebody say something about you, and it was an honor to me that she asked me, a Republican, to deliver her remarks. And it had nothing to do with politics. It had to do with the relationship and the trust we had built working together. Did we agree on everything? Absolutely not. But as a Democrat, did she encourage me even with things that she was in disagreement with? Absolutely. That's how people work together. It shouldn't be every time that somebody disagrees with you, you throw a grenade at them. And that's what it's become.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the next governor's race in Kentucky. We have Andy Beshear now, who is term limited. Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman hasn't made an announcement yet, but relatively sure that she's going to launch a campaign. Do you feel that Lieutenant Governor Coleman could win against a Republican? Do you think Rodkey Adkins will take another shot at it? And do you feel there is a Republican in the party who hasn't ran before who actually has a shot? Because I don't think Savannah can win. She lost in a primary. Obviously, it was horrible. Had to drop out. There just doesn't seem to be any fresh blood in the Republican Party that isn't on that far radical right that could win.
The only person I think that I can immediately come to mind on the Republican side of the aisle is James Comer, because he has done well. He did well in the legislature. He's done well in D.C. I think he's by and large well liked. I think he could do well. I think Speaker Osborne could do well if he ran for governor. And the reason I think that is because he has had to manage all these different egos and personalities for a number of years. So I think he could do very well. I don't know if he has any interest in that.
He does it well, and he does it quietly.
He does. And he does it. He's not bombastic. He's very solid. And we've developed a very good friendship. And I think I respect him highly. On the other side, I think Jacqueline Coleman is going to have tremendous support from the educational world. I do think that Rodkey Adkins will run again. And, he had just come out of the legislature before when he ran. tremendously, whether you like it or not. The governor, I read, has like a 68% approval rating. And don't get me wrong, I'm not an all Andy fan. That's not at all. In fact, I was very upset with Governor Beshear when I was a legislator because he never came to talk with us. He never, to me, in COVID, the way I would have solved a problem as a leader when I found out that this situation was occurring is I'd have brought both chambers together. I would have come in as governor and I'd have said, we've got a problem for our constituents here in Kentucky. How can we work together to get through this situation? Had that happened, we wouldn't have had him sending law enforcement officers to people that were going to church services. We would have been working together. Instead, he elected not to communicate with us at all. And that's probably the gravest complaint that I have against the governor. On the other hand, I think he handled the disasters we've had in Kentucky, the tornado down in western Kentucky with Mayfield, the flooding we've had in eastern Kentucky. I think he's managed those very well. And so, again, there's been this legislative feuding that went on, and I get all of that. That's normal. But there should be an ability to have a open conversation between leaders in our community in the best interest of the people. It's not about the governor. It's not about the legislators, the Senate or the House. It is about the people of Kentucky. And those people are entitled and deserve competent, caring, empathetic legislation that will benefit them. And so, I think there's some other great people that could assume leadership roles. I know Representative Petrie is just a workhorse of a legislator, very smart. I don't know if if he wants to be in the public eye. He just doesn't seem to have that desire, but he's a great legislator. I don't know if Representative Osborne would consider running for governor, but I think he would do a tremendous job as governor. I think James Comer, if he wants to run, will have tremendous support. And because he's been in the trenches in D.C., I think he'll get that financial support that is needed. The problem with politics today is it's so expensive to run. Even in the small race that I had in northern Kentucky against Mr. Roberts, I think there was almost $500,000 expended on the campaign between both parties for less than 4,000 votes.
Yeah.
And so when you think about that in context and running a statewide race in the millions of dollars that are being thrown in by special interest groups, et cetera, it just is become almost something that's overwhelming and out of control.
You look at Governor Beshear recently. He's been appreciative to President Trump for signing the national emergency declarations. He's met and been congenial with Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. It's pretty evident that he's going to run for president, and I think out of anybody in the nation, he has the best shot. I think he dodged a bullet by not becoming Vice President Harris's running mate. I think that would have done irreparable harm to him. He recently launched a podcast, and if I had one question to ask him, it would be, why the hell would you launch a podcast? You're a sitting governor. You've got a microphone anytime you want it. You've got every television camera in the nation on you. You don't need a podcast. What do you think is going to be his downfall, and what do you think the number one issue would be that would prevent him from ascending to the Oval Office?
Well, going back to what I said earlier about he wouldn't communicate with us, in a way, he has almost an elitist attitude. The irony of all of this is the Republicans have condemned him because he doesn't communicate and he was governing by executive order. Ironically, we have a president now in the United States that's governing by executive order. So the same people that were complaining about the governor are not complaining about the president. It's just a mismatch of information. I think the thing about Governor Beshear that's interesting to me is, I worked with his father when I was in the educational world, and he was very amenable, very congenial, would work with us. In fact, one of the funny things that happened is we were meeting in his office. I was an educational rep for Kentucky School Board Association, and it was the week before the Derby. And it was also just prior to the NASCAR race that was going to be held in Kentucky. And he said, he was talking about, we've got all these festivities going on. I said, yeah, I hear there's a great race coming up. And I said, and then the Derby's going to be run too. And of course, I did it as a joke, but we hit it off, and we just worked together, and it was a congenial relationship. Andy, on the other hand, has not had that same forthcoming nature, so I think that works against him. I do think with the support he has, the popularity that he has, that he's going to be able to get the money that's necessary. And I think part of the reason the Republicans couldn't challenge Andy in the last election is they became cannibalistic of themselves.
Right.
We had this intense primary between Kelly Craft and Daniel Cameron. And frankly, I think by the time that Daniel prevailed in the primary, he'd expended almost all of his funds,
right,
and he just didn't have the war chest necessary to combat the governor. And so, and so the election turned out the way it did. Andy went on to a second term, and I think that kind of built his structure for moving on forward. I do think you're right. He'll probably run for president. I don't know how that'll play out. I think he's had 2 terms of building his war chest and also of becoming more mature in his conversation about how he handles things. I don't know how this is going to play out. I think that while President Trump, there's many policies of President Trump I absolutely support. Some of the nasty rhetoric bothers me immensely. And I think that there's going to be this, the pendulum is going to switch again. I think it's not going to go swinging back totally the other way, but politics, much like the stock market, has been consistent over time. And so the pendulum always swings back and forth. And I think that's the beauty of a democracy, is it brings us somewhere to where the people are, which is more in the middle. And right now, I think the extremes are basically calling all the shots on both sides of the aisle. And because of that, I think we, the American people, we, the Kentuckians in the middle, feel somewhat abandoned.
Talking with former State Representative Ed Massey. We'll be right back.